In the days when Israel was ruled, not by kings, but by judges, the people often strayed from their God. And when they turned from him, enemies would rise against them. At this time, the Philistines, a powerful and cruel people, oppressed the tribes of Israel. They controlled the fertile plains, seized harvests, and demanded tribute. Their soldiers marched the roads with spears and chariots, while the children of Israel lived in fear, hiding in hills and caves. Among the tribe of Dan, in a small town called Zorah, there lived a man named Manoah and his wife. They were faithful people, yet they carried a heavy sorrow. Manoah's wife was barren. She had long prayed for a child, and many nights she wept in silence. Yet her womb remained empty, and the hope of motherhood seemed lost. One day, when she was alone in the field, a figure appeared before her, bright, awe-inspiring, with a presence unlike any ordinary man. His face shone with a radiance she could not explain, and his voice carried both gentleness and power. "Behold," the messenger said, "though you have been barren, you shall conceive and bear a son. But take care. From this day forward, you must not drink wine or strong drink, and you must not eat anything unclean. For the child within you shall be set apart to God as a Nazirite from the womb. No razor shall touch his head, for he will begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines." The woman trembled with both fear and joy. She hurried back to her husband and told him all she had seen and heard. Manoah listened intently, but his heart longed for confirmation. He prayed, "O Lord, let the man of God come again to us and teach us what we must do for this child who is to be born." And God heard. The messenger appeared again, this time when the woman was alone in the field. She quickly ran to find Manoah. Together they stood before the radiant visitor. Manoah asked, "When your words come true, how shall we raise the boy? What is to be his way of life?" The messenger replied, "All that I commanded your wife, she must keep. She must eat nothing from the vine, drink no wine or strong drink, and consume nothing unclean. All that I have commanded she shall observe." Still, awed, Manoah said, "Please stay, so we may prepare a young goat for you." The messenger answered, "If you prepare a meal, I will not eat of it. But if you offer a burnt offering, offer it to the Lord." So Manoah took a young goat and a grain offering and placed them on a rock as a sacrifice to God. And when the flame rose toward heaven, the messenger of the Lord ascended in the fire before their eyes. Astonished, Manoah and his wife fell on their faces to the ground, realizing they had seen a heavenly messenger. In time, the promise was fulfilled. A son was born to Manoah's wife, and they named him Samson, which means like the sun or shining one. The child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And as he grew, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir within him, marking him for a destiny, unlike any other. From childhood, Samson was different. His uncut hair set him apart. His strength surprised even his parents. While other boys struggled with the tasks of farming, Samson could lift heavy stones with ease. He ran swifter than his peers and wrestled with a force that seemed beyond human. His parents guarded him carefully, reminding him of the vow of the Nazirite. He was to remain holy, dedicated to God, never touching wine, never cutting his hair, never defiling himself with what was unclean. Samson's heart, however, was restless. He loved the open hills and wild places beyond the town, where the wind roared through the rocks and eagles circled above. There he felt alive, as though the voice of God whispered in the silence. One day, as a young man, Samson wandered into the vineyards near Timnah. Suddenly, a young lion leapt out, roaring, its golden mane flashing in the sun. For a moment Samson froze, but then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. With bare hands he seized the beast. Muscles surged with divine power, and he tore the lion apart as easily as one might rend a young goat. He stood over the carcass, breathing heavily, amazed at what God had done through him. He told no one, not even his parents. Yet in his heart he knew this strength was not his own, but a gift, a sign of the calling upon his life. As months passed, the memory of the lion remained. Once, when Samson returned to the place, he found the carcass of the lion lying by the roadside. To his surprise, a swarm of bees had made honey inside it. He scooped some with his hands and ate as he walked, sharing the sweetness with his parents, but not telling them where it had come from. This was Samson's youth, full of restless energy, marked by strange wonders, a man both blessed and set apart. His parents often watched him with pride, but also with unease, for they knew he was chosen for a great purpose, one that would bring both glory and suffering. Samson himself felt the weight of destiny pressing upon him. At times, he longed for a simple life, to marry, to raise children, to live in peace. But each time he gazed across the hills and saw the Philistine strongholds, each time he heard their soldiers mocking and oppressing his people, a fire stirred in his spirit. He knew he was born for battle. The days of his youth were drawing to a close. Soon, Samson would step into the fullness of his strength, and the world would learn his name. As Samson grew into manhood, his restless spirit often drew him toward the borderlands, where Israel's villages brushed against Philistine cities. He was fascinated by their bustling streets, their music and feasts, their women clothed in bright garments. The Philistines were oppressors, yes, but they lived with confidence and arrogance, unlike the fearful Israelites. To Samson, it seemed that destiny called him closer to them. One day, Samson went down to the town of Timnah, a Philistine settlement not far from Zorah. There, among the vineyards and houses of stone, his eyes fell upon a young woman. She was beautiful, her laughter carried like music, her steps light and graceful. Samson's heart stirred within him, and he returned home to his parents with a fire in his voice. "I have seen a woman in Timnah, one of the daughters of the Philistines. Now get her for me as my wife." Manoah and his wife were stunned. "Is there no woman among your relatives or among all our people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson's reply was firm, almost impatient. "Get her for me. She pleases me well." They did not know that this desire was from the Lord, who was seeking an opportunity to confront the Philistines through Samson. So the family began the journey to Timnah to arrange the marriage. On the way, Samson once again walked through the vineyards where he had slain the lion. His parents went ahead, but Samson lagged behind. Suddenly, the memory of that day returned. The roar, the struggle, the rush of divine power. Curious, he stepped toward the place. There he found the carcass of the lion. From its bones had sprung something unexpected, a swarm of bees and a golden honeycomb. Samson smiled, reached into the carcass, and scooped out the honey with his bare hands. He tasted its sweetness, sticky and rich, a strange gift from something once fierce and deadly. Later he shared the honey with his parents, but kept the secret to himself. In time, arrangements for the marriage were made. According to Philistine custom, Samson was given 30 companions to accompany him during the 7-day wedding feast. Music played, wine flowed, laughter filled the air. Samson, restless and clever, sought amusement. He declared before his companions, "Let me now put forth a riddle to you. If you can solve it within the 7 days of the feast, I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me the answer, then you shall give me 30 garments and 30 changes of clothes." Intrigued, the companions agreed. Samson spoke his riddle. Out of the eater came forth food, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. The men puzzled over it. They argued, whispered, searched their minds. But after 3 days, they could not solve the riddle. Frustration grew, and their pride was wounded. On the 4th day, they turned to Samson's bride. Coax your husband to explain the riddle to us, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Did you invite us here to make us poor?" Terrified, the woman pressed Samson again and again. "You hate me. You don't love me. You have given my people a riddle, but you haven't told me the answer." Samson sighed. "Behold, I have not even told my father or mother. Why should I tell you?" Yet she wept before him all the days of the feast, pleading, nagging, pressing, until his heart was weary. At last, on the seventh day, he gave in and told her the answer. She quickly ran and whispered it to her people. Before the sun set, that day, the men of the city approached Samson with triumphant smiles. "What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion?" Fury burned in Samson's eyes. He knew he had been betrayed. He snapped back with scorn. "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved my riddle." Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily. Burning with anger, Samson went down to Ashkelon, another Philistine city. There he struck down 30 men, stripped them of their garments, and carried the spoils back to pay his wager. But his heart smoldered with rage. He left his bride and returned to his father's house. In Samson's absence, the Philistines gave his wife to one of his companions who had been his friend. When Samson later returned, bringing a young goat as a gift, he expected to go into his wife's chamber. But her father barred the way. "I thought you utterly hated her," the man said, "so I gave her to your companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her instead." The insult cut deep. Samson's eyes flashed with anger. "This time I shall be blameless when I harm the Philistines," he declared. He went out into the fields, caught 300 foxes, and tied them tail to tail in pairs. Between each pair he fastened a torch. Then he lit the torches and released the foxes into the standing grain of the Philistines. Flames roared across their fields, burning sheaves, vineyards, and olive groves. The Philistines cried out in outrage. "Who has done this?" "It was Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite," came the reply, "because his wife was given to his companion." In their fury, the Philistines took the woman and her father and burned them with fire. When Samson heard, his anger flared hotter than ever. He struck down many of them with a great slaughter. Then, to escape their wrath, he went down and dwelt in the cleft of the rock at Etam. The Philistines, burning for revenge, gathered an army and encamped against Judah, spreading fear through the land. The men of Judah went to the Philistines and asked, "Why have you come against us?" They answered, "We have come to bind Samson to do to him as he has done to us." 3,000 men of Judah then went to the rock of Etam. They called out to Samson, "Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this that you have done to us?" Samson replied coldly, "As they did to me, so I have done to them." The men of Judah pleaded, "We have come down to bind you, that we may deliver you into the hand of the Philistines." Samson looked at them, his own people, and a strange sadness flickered across his face. "Swear to me that you will not fall upon me yourselves," they promised. "We will bind you fast and deliver you into their hand, but we will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. When the Philistines saw him, they shouted with triumph. Their warriors rushed forward to seize him. But then the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon Samson. The ropes on his arms became as flax burned with fire, and his bonds melted from his hands. He looked around and saw the jawbone of a donkey lying on the ground. Seizing it, he turned on his enemies. With that simple weapon, he struck down 1,000 men. Breathing heavily, his body soaked in sweat, Samson cast the jawbone aside and cried aloud, "With the jawbone of a donkey, heaps upon heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have slain 1,000 men." When the battle was over, thirst overcame him. Exhausted, he prayed, "You have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant." And now shall I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised. Then God split the hollow place in Lehi, and water gushed out. Samson drank, and his spirit revived. So he called the place En-Hakkore, meaning the spring of him who called. Thus in his early days, Samson's name became a terror among the Philistines and a legend among his own people. His strength was unmatched, his victories astonishing. Yet beneath his triumphs lay a restless heart, a man driven by passion, vengeance, and desire, and though the Philistines feared him, they had not yet seen the end of his strength, nor the depths of his weakness. Samson's fame had spread far and wide. Songs about his strength were whispered in Israelite homes and muttered with fear in Philistine streets. Mothers told their children, "Be good, lest Samson comes," while soldiers spoke his name in hushed voices. He had become both a hero and a terror, a living legend who seemed unstoppable. Yet Samson was not merely a man of war, he was also a man of desires, easily swayed by passion. His heart often led him to places of danger, and though the Spirit of God stirred in him, he did not always walk in wisdom. One night, Samson went down to Gaza, one of the chief cities of the Philistines, a place bustling with merchants, soldiers, and temples to their gods. There he saw a harlot and went into her. Word spread quickly through the city. "Samson is here." The Philistines rejoiced at the chance to trap him. They gathered quietly and surrounded the city. They shut the gates and waited, whispering, "When morning comes, we will kill him." But Samson, lying in the darkness, sensed the danger. At midnight he arose, strong and unshaken. He went to the city gates, massive structures of wood and iron that barred the way. The Philistines had locked them, confident that their enemy was trapped inside. But Samson, filled with divine might, grasped the doors of the gate and the two posts. With a roar he tore them loose, bar and all. The guards scattered in terror as Samson hoisted the entire gate upon his shoulders. Step by step he carried the massive weight out of the city, up the hill that faced Hebron. There, on the mountain's crest, he cast them down like a challenge to the Philistines. Gaza had sought to trap him, but their strength was nothing before. The power of God working in him. This act burned deeply into Philistine pride. To see the gates of their mighty city ripped away and carried to the mountains was humiliation beyond words. From that day, their hatred for Samson grew hotter. They longed not only to defeat him, but to break him utterly. For many years, Samson judged Israel in the days of the Philistines. He was not a judge like others before him, who ruled with wisdom and counsel. His was the rule of strength. He did not gather armies or sit upon a throne. Instead, he was a lone avenger. When the Philistines oppressed, Samson struck back with a fury that no army could withstand. He was a storm that Israel's enemies could not control. Yet even storms can be turned aside, not by force, but by cunning. The Philistines watched him carefully, seeking not to meet his strength with strength, but to find the weakness within the mighty man. It was then that Samson met Delilah. She lived in the valley of Sorek, a place of vineyards and beauty. Delilah was charming, clever, and alluring. Samson's heart was drawn to her as iron to a magnet. He loved her with the reckless passion that had guided so many of his choices. To Delilah he revealed his affection, spending long days and nights in her presence. The Philistine lords, seeing this, seized their chance. They came to Delilah in secret, offering her silver beyond measure. "Entice him," they urged, "and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him and afflict him. Each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver." The promise of wealth glimmered in Delilah's eyes. She agreed, though she smiled sweetly at Samson, as though nothing had changed. That night, as they lay together, Delilah looked into Samson's eyes and spoke with tender curiosity. "Tell me, I pray you, what makes you so strong? With what could you be bound to subdue you?" Samson laughed softly. He enjoyed riddles and games, and her question seemed like another playful challenge. If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, then I shall become weak like any other man. Delilah reported this to the Philistine lords, and they brought her the bowstrings. She waited until Samson was resting, then tied him with them. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson," she cried. At her words, he awoke. The bowstrings snapped like flax touched by fire, and his strength was undiminished. The Philistines lurking in the chamber fled in fear, realizing the trick had failed. Delilah pouted, feigning hurt. "You mocked me and told me lies. Now please, tell me truly, how can you be bound?" Samson, amused, offered another false answer. "If they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak." Again she bound him as he slept, and again she cried, "The Philistines are upon you." But Samson broke the ropes from his arms as if they were threads. Delilah pressed him yet again. "You have mocked me these 3 times. Tell me how you can be bound." Samson smiled, enjoying the game. "If you weave the 7 locks of my hair into the fabric of a loom and fasten it with the pin, then I shall become weak." So Delilah took his hair and wove it into the loom while he slept. She fastened it with the pin and shouted once more. Samson awoke, pulled away the loom and the pin, and left Delilah frustrated. But Delilah did not give up. Day after day she pressed him with her words. Her voice became a constant drip upon his spirit, her pleas unending. Samson, mighty in battle, found himself weary under the weight of her persistence. At last, worn down, he told her all his heart. "No razor has ever touched my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak like any other man." Delilah saw that he had spoken the truth. She sent word to the Philistine lords, saying, "Come up once more, for he has told me all his heart." They came, bringing silver in their hands. That night Samson lay with his head in Delilah's lap. She lulled him to sleep, her fingers stroking his hair. Then she called for a man, who came and shaved off the 7 locks of his head. When his hair was gone, she began to torment him, and his strength left him. She cried out once more, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson!" He awoke, thinking, "I will go out as before and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. The Philistines seized him, bound him with bronze shackles, and gouged out his eyes. Blind and broken, the mighty judge of Israel was led away to Gaza, the city whose gates he once carried upon his shoulders. There they threw him into prison, where he was forced to grind grain like an ox. So fell Samson, the strongest of men, undone not by armies but by his own weakness. Yet even in prison, God was not finished with him. The once mighty Samson, who had carried city gates and slain armies, now found himself bound in chains, blinded, and mocked by his enemies. In Gaza, the Philistines set him to grinding grain in the prison house, a task reserved for beasts of burden or the lowest of slaves. The sound of the millstone turned by Samson's scarred hands echoed in the chambers, a grim reminder of his fall. Day after day, he pushed the mill. The eyes that once burned with fire saw only darkness. The hands that once tore lions and broke ropes now felt the rough stones and wooden beams. His heart must have been heavy, filled with shame. He had betrayed his calling, squandered the strength given to him by God, and surrendered his secret to the whispers of a woman. Yet while the Philistines mocked, something unseen was happening. Slowly, steadily, Samson's hair began to grow again. Each strand was a sign that God's covenant still lingered, that the story was not yet over. The Philistines, meanwhile, rejoiced at their victory. News of Samson's capture spread quickly. Across the cities of their land, people celebrated. At last the terror of Israel was broken. Their temples rang with sacrifices to Dagon, their grain god, whom they credited for the triumph. "Dagon has delivered our enemy into our hand," they cried. In time, the lords of the Philistines gathered for a great sacrifice to Dagon in the temple at Gaza. It was a massive building supported by great stone pillars, with galleries above where thousands crowded to watch. The air was thick with incense, the sound of cymbals and flutes ringing as worshippers shouted praise to their God. Amid the celebration, a command was given, "Bring out Samson, that he may entertain us." So the blind judge of Israel was led from the prison. A boy guided him by the hand into the temple center. The people roared with laughter and mockery as they beheld him. Some threw food, others cursed, and many cheered, "Our God has triumphed. The mighty Samson is nothing before Dagon." Samson stood in the midst of the temple, his ears filled with scorn. But in the depths of his heart, a prayer began to stir, a prayer of repentance, of desperation. He called softly to the boy who guided him, "Let me feel the pillars which support the temple, that I may lean against them." The boy, unsuspecting, led him to the great central pillars. Samson stretched out his hands and felt the cool stone beneath his palms. He stood there, silent, as the noise of the crowd swelled around him. On the roof above, about 3,000 men and women gathered to watch the spectacle, while below, the lords of the Philistines drank and shouted. Samson lifted his blinded eyes toward heaven. His voice, trembling yet firm, rose above the laughter. "O Lord God, remember me, I pray. Strengthen me just once more, that with one blow I may be avenged on the Philistines for my 2 eyes." The Spirit of the Lord stirred within him again, as in days of old. The strength that had left him when his hair was shorn now surged through his body, renewed by God's mercy. His muscles tensed, his chest heaved, and with a cry that shook the temple, Samson braced himself against the 2 pillars. "Let me die with the Philistines," he roared. With all his might he pushed. The pillars groaned, the stones trembled, and the entire temple shook. Cracks split through the walls as the roof began to collapse. Screams filled the air as dust and debris rained down. The mighty hall of Dagon fell in ruin, crushing the lords and the thousands who had gathered. In that moment, Samson gave his life, but in his death, he struck down more of his enemies than he had in all his life. When the dust settled and the cries of the Philistines were silenced, word reached the Israelites. Samson was dead, but his final act had broken the pride of the Philistines and struck terror into their land. His brothers and the men of his father's house came down and took his body from the ruins. With solemn reverence, they carried him back to Zorah and Eshtaol, to the tomb of Manoah his father. There they buried the judge who had been both Israel's scourge and deliverer. For 20 years, Samson had judged Israel in the days of the Philistines. His life had been a storm, brilliant and destructive, flawed yet filled with divine purpose. He was a man chosen from birth, gifted with unimaginable strength, yet undone by his own weaknesses. His story was not one of quiet leadership or lasting peace, but of fiery confrontation and dramatic deliverance. Through him, God showed both the power to save and the cost of disobedience. Samson's fall was tragic, yet his final cry to God revealed a heart that even in brokenness turned back to its maker. And though the man was gone, the legend of Samson lived on, a reminder to Israel of both the frailty and the strength that comes when God chooses to work through human vessels. Samson's story did not end with the collapse of the temple. His body lay buried, but his memory echoed through the valleys of Israel. Children whispered his name when they played at battle. Soldiers spoke of him in their camps, recounting his feats with awe. Farmers, grinding their wheat, remembered the man who once ground grain in Gaza, a prisoner made a beast. And priests, lifting prayers to heaven, recalled the Nazirite who had been chosen before his birth. But Samson's legacy was not simple. He was a man of contradictions, mighty yet weak, Chosen, yet rebellious, victorious, yet tragically flawed. His life was both a warning and a wonder. From the day of his birth, Samson had been set apart as a Nazirite. No razor was to touch his hair, no wine to pass his lips, no unclean food to defile him. He was to be a living symbol of dedication to God. Yet as he grew, his desires often pulled him away from the path laid out for him. He longed for women, not of Israel, but of the Philistines, the very enemies he was born to oppose. His parents pleaded with him to choose differently, to honor his calling. But Samson's heart was stubborn. He followed his eyes, not his faith. And yet, even in his failures, God worked. His choices led to conflict with the Philistines, and through those conflicts, Israel was delivered. What Samson intended for himself, God turned for the nation's good. This is one of the mysteries of his story, how divine purpose can weave even through human weakness. Samson's strength was not his own. It came from God. Each time he rose to fight, it was because the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. But when Samson revealed his secret and gave himself over to Delilah's schemes, the Spirit departed. His hair was not magical. It was a sign of his covenant. When he despised that covenant, his strength vanished. Samson teaches that the greatest enemy is not always outside us. Sometimes it is within. No Philistine could overpower him in battle, yet his own desires brought him low. His passion for Delilah, his arrogance, his recklessness, these were the chains that bound him long before the bronze shackles were fastened. And yet, in his final act, Samson also teaches about redemption. Though blinded and broken, he turned to God once more. His last prayer was not for glory or pleasure, but for strength to fulfill his calling. It was an act of surrender, a recognition that only God could restore what was lost. In that moment, Samson's faith shone brighter than ever before. So his death was not only a tragedy, but also a triumph. He had wasted much, but he did not waste the final chance. By giving his life, he delivered Israel one last time, and in doing so, he found a measure of peace. Generations later, when Israel told stories of their heroes, Samson was remembered, not merely as the strongest man, but as a man chosen by God, who faltered and fell, yet was lifted again by mercy. Some saw him as a warning. Do not live as Samson lived, lest you fall as he fell. Others saw him as a comfort. Even when we fail, God can use us, and his mercy can meet us in our weakness. His story was told around fires at night, in homes, in villages, in the courts of kings. His name was spoken with reverence and sorrow, with admiration and caution. The memory of the man who carried gates, who slew lions and armies, who fell for love and rose in death, lingered for centuries. And in the sacred scrolls, his story was preserved as part of the great tapestry of Israel's history. For Samson's life, though brief and tumultuous, was a thread woven into the greater plan of God, a plan that stretched far beyond his own days, reaching into the future when deliverance would come, not by might nor by the strength of one man's arms, but by the hand of the Lord himself. Samson's tale stands as both a mirror and a lamp. A mirror because it reflects the struggles within each human heart, the pull of desire, the danger of pride, the cost of disobedience. A lamp because it shows the light of God's grace, a light that can shine even in the darkest prison. And so his story endures, not only as a tale of a warrior, but as a parable of life. Strength without obedience leads to ruin. Weakness with faith can still lead to victory. Even after his death, Samson's presence was felt across the land of Israel. The stories of his might, his failures, and his final triumph were passed from father to son, mother to daughter. In the quiet hills and valleys, people recounted the events: the lion torn by hand, the riddles at Timnah, the burning fields, the jawbone of a donkey, the gates of Gaza carried to the mountaintop, and finally the temple that fell with him inside. To the children of Israel, Samson was more than a man. He was a symbol. He represented the power of God's Spirit working through a single imperfect person. His life reminded them that God could use anyone, regardless of flaws, if they were willing to turn back to Him. The elders taught that obedience and faith mattered more than raw strength. They spoke of Samson's mistakes, how passion and pride had led him into traps, how temptation had blinded him, how trusting the wrong person had cost him dearly. And yet they also celebrated his courage, his refusal to submit to oppression, his final act of deliverance. The Philistines, for their part, were left wary for decades. Even though Samson was gone, fear lingered in their cities. They spoke of him as a ghostly shadow, a warning that the God of Israel could strike in unexpected ways. Merchants and soldiers alike told tales of the mighty Nazarite who had defied kings and armies. For generations, Israel would face new enemies, conquer new lands, and struggle to remain faithful. And in those struggles, they remembered Samson. He became a figure of hope, proof that even a single person, moved by God's Spirit, could change the course of history. Religious leaders reflected on Samson's life and drew lessons for future generations. They said, "Strength is nothing without wisdom. Passion without guidance leads to ruin. But when a heart is aligned with God, even the smallest spark can become a flame that illuminates the darkness." Samson's story also foreshadowed what was to come in Israel's long and difficult history. He showed that God's plan often works through unexpected channels. Even a man of great flaws could serve divine purpose. Even death could be a vehicle of victory. And so in homes and schools, in fields and villages, the name Samson lived on. Artists painted scenes of his feats, poets wrote of his struggles, and storytellers dramatized his battles. Children played games, imagining themselves lifting gates, throwing beasts, or standing against overwhelming armies. But beyond the spectacle, the deeper meaning endured. Israel learned that true strength was not in muscle alone, nor was victory measured only by the fall of enemies. Real triumph came from faithfulness, from recognizing dependence on God, from humility in the face of power. Samson's hair, his chains, his final prayer, all became symbols of this eternal truth. Even the landscape bore witness. The rock clefts where he once roamed, the mountains where he carried the gates, the tomb of his father where he was laid. To rest, all were remembered. Pilgrims and travelers would pause, telling one another the tale of the man who rose and fell, yet whose life still carried a message of divine purpose. And for Israel, the moral was clear. God works in mysterious ways. He can bring strength from weakness, hope from despair, and victory from failure. Samson had lived and died as a flawed man, yet through him, God's plan moved forward. So the story of Samson did not end in the ruins of a temple. It lived on in the hearts of those who remembered, in the songs of the people, in the lessons, taught from generation to generation. And every time a man faced a challenge greater than his own strength, every time a people felt oppressed by enemies more powerful than themselves, the memory of Samson whispered, "Do not fear. God's power can work through you even when you are weak." In this way, Samson became more than a story of might and tragedy. He became a symbol of hope, redemption, and the enduring truth that God's hand can guide the course of history, often in ways unseen until the final moment. And so, for thousands of years, when the children of Israel told tales by the fire, when parents whispered lessons at bedtime, when poets sought heroes to inspire courage and faith, Samson's name rang out. Strong, flawed, human, yet divinely chosen. The man who had been a storm in life became a beacon in memory, a lesson in humility and power, in failure and redemption, a reminder that God can use even the imperfect to achieve his perfect purpose. And so ends the story of Samson, the mighty judge of Israel. His life was filled with strength and weakness, triumphs and failures, lessons and legacy. He showed this world that even the strongest among us are human, and that true power comes from God, not from our own hands. Remember his courage, his mistakes, and his final act of faith. Samson teaches us that no matter how far we fall, there is always a chance for redemption, and that our struggles can serve a purpose greater than ourselves. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more incredible tales from the Bible, make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and join us for the next journey through history and faith. Thank you for watching, and may your heart be inspired by the stories of courage, faith, and redemption. Even after Samson's body was laid to rest, his story did not fade into silence. Across the hills and valleys of Israel, his name echoed through generations. Mothers whispered it to their children as a lesson in courage and faith. Fathers spoke of him as both a warning and an inspiration. The deeds of Samson, tearing lions with his hands, burning fields, defeating armies, and carrying city gates, became timeless symbols of human strength infused with divine purpose. But more than his feats, it was his humanity that left a mark. He was a man of contradictions, strong yet flawed, chosen yet rebellious, victorious yet humbled. His failures were as instructive as his victories. Through his life, the people of Israel learned that true power is not measured by the might of one's arms or the destruction one can cause, but by the heart that seeks to follow God even in weakness. In every story told, Samson's life reminded them that human weakness is not the end of the story. The chains that bound him, the temptations that deceived him, the blindness that humbled him, all became symbols of the struggles each person faces. Yet in the midst of his trials, when he turned back to God, his strength was renewed. His final act of courage in the temple of the Philistines showed that redemption is possible, even in the most desperate circumstances. Samson's legacy became more than a tale of heroism. It became a lesson of hope, faith, and divine purpose. It reminded Israel that even those who fall can rise again, that even the broken can be instruments of great change, and that God's power is not limited by human imperfection. Every battle he fought, every enemy he faced, every moment of his life carried a message. No one is beyond the reach of God's plan. Generations later, Israel would continue to face enemies, hardships, and trials. And in those moments they remembered Samson, not as a perfect man, but as a man used by God. They learned that courage is found in faith, that perseverance matters more than perfection, and that even a flawed life can leave a lasting mark on the world. For those who hear his story today, Samson serves as both a mirror and a lamp, a mirror reflecting the struggles, desires, and weaknesses within every human heart, and a lamp showing the light of hope, courage, and redemption that can shine even in the darkest moments. His life, full of action, mistakes, and faith, continues to inspire, reminding us that God's hand can work through anyone, and that every life, no matter how flawed, can serve a purpose far greater than we imagine. As we close the story of Samson, let us remember not only the strength he possessed, but the lessons he left behind, that obedience matters, that God's Spirit can move through us, that courage is forged through trials, and that redemption is always within reach. Samson's name will live on, not merely as the strongest man, but as a testament to the enduring power of faith, the importance of choices, and the eternal truth that God can turn weakness into strength and tragedy into triumph. If you have been inspired by Samson's story, take these lessons with you. Let them remind you that your own life, with all its challenges and imperfections, can still shine with purpose and courage. And if you wish to continue exploring stories of faith, courage, and divine purpose, subscribe to the channel, ring the notification bell, and join us on more journeys through the incredible tales of the Bible. Thank you for listening, and may the story of Samson stay in your heart as a guiding light for strength, faith, and hope.